This episode of the Apples to Apples podcast is brought to you by SeatGeek. SeatGeek makes the process of purchasing tickets off the secondary market hassle-free. Whether it be a sporting event, concert, theater event, or anything else you can think of, SeatGeek's got you covered. I also got you covered with my new discount code Apples to Apples. You could use it at checkout for 20% off your first purchase off the SeatGeek app. Once again, sporting event, concert, anything you may have coming up on the schedule, use code Apples to Apples for 20% off your first purchase using SeatGeek. What's up, New York? How's it going? I'm Ross Facaturo, bringing you guys a 48th episode of the Apples to Apples podcast. Got a special guest joining me today. Talk a little Subway Series. Got a game to recap, a game to preview as well. Joining me today is Rami Lavi. You could catch him on the Fantasy Baseball podcast, Believe in Jets podcast. Also simply the Rami Lavi podcast. Catch him on WFAN sometimes as well. So Rami, how you doing, man? Thanks for joining me.
Appreciate you for having me. Of course, we tried to work this out for feels like a couple of weeks already, so I'm glad we're getting to do this.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And what better time, you being a Yankee fan, me being a Met fan, and just overall this being in New York, being a baseball center town here in New York, than to do this in between the two games in the second rendition of this year's Subway Series, where a couple minutes ago Mets pulled out a 3-2 win by the skin of their teeth, basically being left with Jake Diekman when all else failed. Basically a guy who the majority of Met fans, myself included, wanted off this team entirely. And if you look at the lineup too, the reason they basically pulled out with the win offensively was a 2-run homer off the bat of Jeff McNeil, who basically fits that same exact description. So Rami, looking at it from this Mets perspective, what do you think of guys like Diekman and McNeil, who at their lowest points, basically the entire fan base wanted gone completely, to now basically double-handedly winning this game for them tonight?
I mean, Jeff McNeil this is as good as I've seen him in the last stretch since the All-Star game, since, I don't know, 2 years ago, right? I mean, since that at-bat that everyone goes back to in the World Baseball Classic in Miami, where he had that incredible at-bat against Ohtani, that's the last time he's looked this good, and that at-bat tonight was no different. I mean, fouling off tough pitches, taking close pitches, and before he even hit the home run, I was like, this is as good as locked in as I've seen Jeff McNeil in forever. And then he hits the home run. And then, of course, Diekman. I mean, it's crazy. It's like they keep talking about it, the lefty. And this is what happens every night with the Yankees. It's like, can we get it to Judge in a one-run game? Like, that's all we want, because the Yankees have two hitters, and Severino's not wrong about that. The Yankees have two hitters right now, and the Mets pitch around Aaron Judge every time, and then in the ninth inning, they're like, all right, you know what, Diekman, you pitched him. Of anyone, you're going to let Diekman pitch to him, but no one else could pitch to him the whole game. They work around him every time, and then the ninth inning, they pitch to him. And, I mean, the way he starts him off with the fastball in the inside corner, so he's setting up that pitch and then ultimately coming back with it after he throws a couple pitches off the plate, comes back with that fastball, just darts it on the inside corner. Too close to take if you're Aaron Judge, by the way. He should know better than that, but it's tough when you haven't seen a pitch close all night, and then you take that pitch. Like, I don't blame Judge, and obviously all the weight on his shoulders. But, yeah, from the Mets perspective, I mean, it's guys, and that's, when you're finding ways to lose, it's guys like that finding ways to screw it up. And when you're finding ways to win, it's guys pulling through no matter. Every night it's someone else. So whether it's Nimmo one night, McNeil another night, Harrison Bader another night. I mean, Harrison Bader runs that ball down by Greg Bird. Not Greg Bird, my God. Lefty first baseman Ben Rice. That ball that's hit the other way, it's a home run in 17 ballparks, right? So everyone likes to talk about, Yankee Stadium's a little league ballpark. No, it's a home run in 17 other ballparks. And Bader, I'm not sure how many guys run that down. He makes a great play on it, great read on it all the way, and makes the catch. And that's essentially saving the game as well. Of course, he reaches on the error and runs into an out a little bit later. But yeah, when you're finding ways to win, it's different guys pulling through every night.
And we want to talk about, fly balls being run down left center field. McNeil is basically a redemption homer. This is the exact game. You want to talk about the at-bat before. He was that fly ball, I thought Verdugo was going to track down, wound up hitting off the wall and held up Torrens, who was basically probably would have ran in for the run as well had McNeil not stopped him. Second, third base line. So kind of a little redemption arc there, tonight itself. So, but you brought up, I mean, this kind of, certain guys go through slumps. I mean, you look at Nimmo, I think they brought up, he's like 2 for 19, 2 for 20 since the All-Star break. this is a guy who was batting, north of 350, I think it was, since they put him in the two slot. They swapped him and Lindor, who's also been on a tear lately. Once they swapped those two top of the lineup, you couldn't get him out. So Nimmo kind of, wouldn't say fell back down to earth because he has been good overall, but he's not torching the ball. And now you see guys, and even Alonso too, overall has been in a slump. But I kind of even said, it seems like McNeil, passed the voodoo baton off to Alonso. This guy's got no pop at all. He had that snag at first. It was mainly Nunez's fault, but they didn't come up with the out. Just overall, it's been a mess with the bat. Now you see McNeil looks like Roberto Alomar all of a sudden. So I don't know what it is. Just kind of guys picking up the slack. I mean, even certain guys like Tyrone Taylor, listen, hasn't been there all year. Even guys like DJ Stewart seems like they kind of tuned him out of the starting lineup entirely. But just overall, the fact that when certain guys don't have it, it's just not a complete, dead weight 1 through 9. And there's actually certain guys that could pick up the slack this year.
Yeah, that's what's been happening for the Mets since, I guess, the middle of June, right? Or beginning of June. In May, like I said, finding ways to lose. And that's why I believe in this team, because good teams find ways to win. I mean, what has JT Martinez done in a month, right? He was the guy who was carrying them when they first got hot. He hasn't done anything, right? Obviously, Marte is hurt now and was really good before that. You talk about Jose Iglesias, or Mark Vientos was hot as anything. And obviously Francisco Alvarez was super hot, and now it feels like he's cooled off. So, good teams and well-rounded teams find guys to contribute 1 through 9. And then obviously beyond that, the bench, the bullpen, the starting rotation. Whereas the Yankees, on the other hand, you see what a bad team looks like when you have only 2 guys contributing and nobody else. So, Volpe's been better since the All-Star break, but yeah, the Yankees right now are the exact opposite of the Mets, where, I mean, and you look up and down the lineup, you look at the names and like, well, who do you expect? You don't expect Jahmai Jones and JD Davis to be contributing for you. So, I mean, you're kind of getting what these guys are worth.
Right. I mean, look, Jahmai Jones, they were bringing up, he's played for, this is his fourth organization, and he's still eligible to win Rookie of the Year this year. And he's batting leadoff, and I think a couple weeks ago he was batting cleanup. So the fact that now you even bring up JD Davis batting cleanup tonight and was
But then you
up,
pinch hit for him, right? So obviously, how much do you trust him? You're pinch hitting for your leadoff hitter.
there is no consistency at all. And even Davis, too, they said it was like his 6th or 7th start with the team. And twice now against his former team, he's batting cleanup. And he couldn't put bat on ball to save his life tonight. This is a guy where I got to eat crow on that. I wanted them to bring him back off the year he had last year with San Fran. Well, 2 years ago with San Fran. And the start he had with Oakland, he looked solid this year. I don't know what they got out in Oakland. They got to have like a hitter's lab or something. You want to talk about, potential deadline ads. Look at what Brent Rooker, former Yankee Miguel Andujar, you dropped name dropped Greg Bird before. How about those old for the baby bombers, some of those guys, Andujar resurfacing a little bit. And at this point, you brought up with that lineup. I mean, you take anybody at this point, dude. You brought up Severino. There could have potentially been some bulletin board material there. But I mean, it really didn't turn out to be anything. Glaber had that homer, but you were talking about Ben Rice had the ball, would have been out in 17 parks. That Glaber homer was out in 5 parks. So I mean, you swap them one
You
for
get
one.
one back. Yep.
Yeah, it's on the scoreboard at the end of the day, but you look at it honestly, and just overall, he's been a mess. You saw the LeMahieu, both sides of the ball. He had his first homer of the year yesterday, another botched ball in the field, and just overall, you look at it, it's legitimately a 2 batter lineup. And I thought when Deepman walked Soto on those 4 pitches, even considering the lefty matchup, I said, oh my God, Judge is sending this ball 500 feet first pitch he sees. And obviously it didn't equate to that. And you're looking at some people now on Twitter kind of resurfacing the Mr. Low Leverage kind of accusation. If that's kind of fallen back into form, you saw, what was it? I forgot who they were playing, but a couple weeks ago, he came up in a big spot. I think he popped it up or something. And just overall, considering the postseason disappearances and just overall when it comes down to, the game falling on his bat, seems like more often than not he kind of falls short.
Yeah, I'm looking this up now because I really do wonder what his numbers are in high leverage situations. And you could look that up, but like I struggle with it because I do think that in some ways you're not wrong, but again, he's seeing no pitches to hit really in high leverage situations. So like, I almost don't blame him. You know what I mean? And then again, this is a guy who didn't see a pitch close to the plate all day, right? And now all of a sudden you're going to have him bat in the biggest spot of the game and now you expect him to take these close pitches and be able to I know always be ready, but like there's something to having 4 at-bats where you just see nothing close, and all of a sudden you got to lock in with a runner on in the 9th inning in a 1-run game. You know what I mean? I mean,
It's
he's
like you're
human.
pinch
So
hitting. It's,
yeah. So like I don't know. I definitely want to look those numbers up, but yeah, I mean I can't. And here, clutch stats we have here. I don't know if this is leverage, high leverage. Aaron Judge this year, has a 409 on base, 281 batting average, 4 home runs, and 20 RBIs in 71 high leverage plate appearances. So
I mean,
you
you
know
can't
what
really
I
get
mean? Like,
numbers.
and high leverage, how do they define high leverage on this? Here we go. High leverage is defined as I don't know what they have here, but the point is, I think it's like 1-run game, last 3 innings, something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man on or something. There's a certain
Here
formula.
it is, 7th inning or later, in a tie, ahead by 1, or the tying run at least on deck.
All right, so I mean, you could have a lot of scenarios where it's kind of like save situations. You could be down what 5, and if the bases are loaded, it counts for a save. So I'm not
Right.
sure.
Right.
Those
So the
numbers are
bases
still
could be
solid.
loaded in a 5-run game, and that's considered high leverage. If you're down 5 and the bases are loaded, and it's a 7th inning or later, it's a high leverage spot. And he's batting 281 with a 409 on base,
Which
and
I
has
mean,
4 home runs, 20 RBIs.
if you think about it though, talking about the numbers this guy has, technically for him, those are bad numbers. And let's be real, this guy, the way they talk him up. At the end, listen, the far majority of this league, anybody would take those numbers. You're looking at guys like, Judge and Gunner, Bobby Witt, they're like the far minority. But I mean, our guy Keith McPherson always says men lie, women lie, numbers don't. I mean, when he's got a 400 on base, you can't complain. It just feels like the amount of times we've seen him in the postseason, this guy who more often than not is, I wouldn't say the sole reason. I'd say, recent years more than likely, but, dating back to 2019, 2020, he'd be a big, big reason why they made the postseason. And then come October, he was getting booed every other at bat. And I mean, besides, what was it, 2018, I think was his one solid run. 22 was the glaring one because that was 62, I think, when he
Mm-hmm.
had the 62
Mm-hmm.
homers, and he was a complete no-show against Cleveland and obviously Houston. But just overall, I think there's kind of that reputation around him.
Well, that's another point though. I mean, you're relying on one guy to do everything for you. And so when he's not hitting, it becomes glaring. And so we start to blame him. But the reality is that we're so used to him doing everything that when he doesn't do it, all of a sudden we think it's his fault. No, it's always everyone around him fault that you're relying on him to do everything in the first place.
I hear you, man. And listen, you look at this lineup now overall, you want to drop specific names. I mean, Verdugo had the hit tonight, but I heard the number was like 15 for his last 120,
Mm-hmm.
125. I mean, this is the guy where at one point in the year, and this is more so a praise on him than a knock on, I don't say a knock on Soto or just overall like an irrational thought, but there was a point in the year where people were saying, would you rather I guess keep Verdugo rather than dish out the crazy money for Soto, which debate whoever you want may be warranted to the majority. But a lot of people were saying pay Verdugo for the value he's bringing. That's not going to be anywhere near as much money. And I think after everybody points to that homer against Fenway, that first at bat back up in Boston against who basically shunned him out of town, Alex Cora, all of them had that first at bat homer, and ever since then he has been, to say he's been a shell of himself is an understatement. He's just been a total disaster.
Yeah, and he could get to the point right now where he might be the fifth outfield or the fourth outfielder. You know, if could be starting a rehab assignment later this week, they said. I mean, then where do you do? I call up Dominguez as soon as you possibly can and throw him in center field and knock Verdugo out of the lineup or put him in the DH spot. The point is, again, they need as much help as they can get. And in the next couple of weeks before the trade deadline, I think they will get Stanton back in the lineup. I think they will probably get Dominguez in the lineup. And I'd still go make at least one move for a third baseman, second baseman. I'd make 2 moves. I'd try and get 2 more bats. I'd get a utility infielder and I'd get a stud third baseman in addition to Dominguez and Stanton coming back. And then we could have the conversation about the Yankee offense. But until that happens, there's nothing to talk about. I mean, it's the same thing every freaking night. Okay, cool. I was there yesterday when they put up 9 runs on Tampa, but My God, that's once in a while.
And a lot of that, I know there's no such thing as garbage time in baseball, but I mean that the three of those were the top nine. Soto tacked three of those on his second homer of the day, and we're talking about
It's
Soto, one of those two hitters.
4 home runs after they're already up 5-1, right? Or 4 runs after they're already up 5 runs. The 2 home runs, one a 3-run shot and one a solo shot. Yeah.
But by the way, talk about yesterday what a circus that turned into with Jose Siri with the trot and everything. That basically just became the storyline of the game. And I guess Rodon with the quality start. He had like 10 Ks on the night, and you want to talk
Dude
about
was
him?
awesome. I mean, I was sitting next to Emmanuel Babari for the game, and we're just talking about like, oh my God, like this dude. Because at one point he was throwing a no-hitter. I asked Babari, I said, does it count as an announcer, Jenks? Because you're the announcer for the New York Yankees, but he wasn't announcing that game. Shackle was. Babari did the game tonight. And so me and Babari were talking. He's like, he's going to throw a no-hitter. Just watch. And I was like, wait, if you're not doing it on the broadcast, but you still are an announcer, does that count as an announcer, Jenks? Apparently it does, because then he gave up the home run like a few pitches later. But yeah, and what I said to Emmanuel, I said, watch, he'll pitch a no-hitter. He could pitch 3 no-hitters in a row. I'm still not starting him in a playoff game. And you know what's so interesting about that start? He goes 1, 2, 3 in the first inning, has no adversity at all in the entire game. Barely faced, even the run he gave up was a solo shot. So he barely had any situations where there were runners on base. Now he had 2 walks and 1 other hit, but there was never a rally against him. There never felt like there was multiple run. I don't think there was ever multiple runners on base at a single time. And that's the point. When it's easy, he's fine, Rodon. It's when he starts to face a little bit of adversity, he can't figure it out. A guy makes an error, he can't pick him up. He gives up an early run, he loses himself. That's the problem, because in a playoff game, you're going to face adversity. And so, sure, when it's going good, it's going great for him, and he could pitch a clean game. But if he has to be perfect in order to be competitive, you can't rely on that, because he's not going to be perfect every time.
I remember there was I think it was the Toronto game. They were up, what, 1-0 or no, the game I'm trying to think of was
It's the
Glaber
Tampa
tacked
game.
on the. Oh, all right. The Toronto game was a total implosion. I think Springer had like 3 homers on the night. Talk about another guy in a bad contract. He basically revived his season. I think it was the Tampa game. Glaber had the homer first half of the inning, and then he just completely imploded. And I remember that was basically the complete fallout.
Gave up 4 runs in the first. Yeah, I was working that game with I forget. I know Susan was on the call. I think it was Babari as well. So I was working that game with them, and it's immediate. You know what I mean? Like, they go up 1-0. He has the lead before he ever has to throw a pitch, and then all of a sudden he gives up. I think it was 3 singles in a row, and then a 3-run homer.
Yeah.
So I mean, my God.
Well, I was thinking, this game the other night, you probably thought, if you look at his number, because that was basically shades of the San Francisco Rodon. But if you look at, San Francisco's kind of built up the reputation of basically the immortal pitching lab. You look at what they did with Gosman and DeSclafani, got names like that. And Rodon had the great year in his last year in Chicago. Other than that, he was a disaster for a guy who was hyped up. I wouldn't say Strasburg Skeens levels by any means, but he was, I think, a 3rd overall pick in whatever year he was drafted. He was really hyped up out of college and never found his footing up until when he had a chance to basically cash out of Chicago. Took the 1-year deal with San Francisco, and then once he got multiple years on a deal, last year I have never seen I don't want to say athlete, because that might be hyperbole. I can't remember the last time I've seen a baseball player be so checked out than Carlos Rodon last year. And that basically, if I were a Yankee fan, and just from afar, he had for the first couple months he was solid this year, but basically reverting back to basically what he was last year, he looks so dejected, and he essentially looks like he has no incentive to play. And I'm not saying, you look at guys like Alonso and even Glaber this year too, and Conforto, that's what chased him out of town, and even Severino. I mean, you look at more often than not, you see players try to cash out of their contract years. And I think Rodon is a perfect example of that, because, his first year and a half with the Yankees, more often than not, he's not bad. He's legitimately horrific. And you brought Tampa, Toronto, the KC series last series of the year. I know they were out of the playoff spot, but it didn't really matter. But he went through the whole order, had 1 out, I think, right? And not even. So he was next level bad. And the fact that you're kind of seeing shades of it, albeit yesterday, kind of going right back into the better direction a little bit. You see the start against Baltimore. He basically got, his start withered away. It seemed like he had like 80 pitches in the 5th inning. So this guy, it just seems like when it feels like it's as bad as it could be. He just takes it to another level. And when you got guys like Heel, albeit the terrific first half, kind of just completely implode. He's getting back on his feet a little bit now, but I think Rodon is the glaring issue in that rotation, even despite the start he had yesterday.
Yeah, I think Heels really turned it around, and tonight was another example of that. Where in the fifth inning, it could have gone away from him there, right? And he's all over the place with the location, right? With the bases loaded, he throws a pitch that gets snow coned, right? That
Yeah.
almost goes to the backstop. He gives up one run and then holds it there, and that's two things to me. Number one, credit Luis Hill because that's what he's been struggling with when it starts to get away from him a little bit, especially later in the start when he's more fatigued. He's been having a tough time locating and bearing down and getting out of it. And really credit Aaron Boone. And I know a lot of people don't say this, but credit Aaron Boone for sticking with him because I thought when he was struggling right before the All-Star break, they were not letting him work through trouble. Anytime he'd start to see a little bit of trouble, Boone would come get him. And the problem with that is he'll start looking over his shoulder. Even if it was the fourth inning, he'd be looking over his shoulder every time he got in trouble, waiting to see, is Boone coming? Is he not coming? Think about the Mets game. The first Mets game at Citi Field, I thought his stuff was actually really good. And then he ran into trouble a couple of times and couldn't work through it. So I think this was a big step in the right direction where the Yankees realized, hey, there's a confidence thing here where maybe if we let him work through it, that will be what ultimately gets him to the other side. I thought tonight was a good step in the right direction. Of course, you want him to throw more than 5 innings, but he gave you enough to win. And then the last couple of starts, obviously the one in Baltimore before the break and the first start coming out of the break, he's been good.
Right. And you actually brought up a good point. I forgot with Rodon. You talk about lack of confidence with Heel. It's basically the polar opposite with Rodon, where he acts like he runs the show. Basically, Boone comes walking out of the dugout, he's screaming profanities, he's acting like who the hell you think you are, basically. And I remember Ottavino got taken out a couple weeks ago. People thought he was calling Mendoza an effing douchebag. I God forbid the things
I mean, he did.
mic'd up. That's what it looked like basically. But if we mic'd up Rodon for a game, God forbid some of the words we hear out of his mouth. Just overall, I mean, with San Francisco too, he kicked the bat. I think the bat shot hit. I think it was Tyro Estrada hit him in the
blowing
leg.
the kiss in Anaheim last year.
That's right, a Morash with the kiss my fat ass and all that. The bulletin board material this guy's put out in a year and a half, and I think with Heel, you brought it up, kind of the lack of confidence, but overall the fact that the age and even despite coming off the Tommy John, you feel like you have something to build on with him. Even despite you see the recent struggles, and he looked good tonight, and even with Baltimore, he looked solid. He's kind of finding his footing again, but overall, you have something to build with him. Obviously, you have Cole despite the slow start, but that's whatever. You didn't have the regular conditioning, all that. But you're not really concerned about him. And another name to bring up is Nestor. Where what's kind of your take on Cortez right now?
It's done. I mean, his whole thing was kind of like he was never a great pitcher. He had that one good year where he was relieving and then he'd start sometimes. I think it was 2021. And he pitches he goes back and forth between the bullpen and the starting rotation. And it's like, oh, wow, this guy, interesting, right? And then he starts all year for them in 22 and is fantastic. And now it's the year that he's the All-Star and it's incredible. And he's pitching in the All-Star game in LA. And he's mic'd up as he's pitching, you know what I mean? And that
he
was
led
like
the league in
fun.
ERA. He wasn't qualified, but I think he led the league in ERA, I'm pretty sure.
Exactly. And so then, it was a fun story, but it was always gimmicky. He was never this great. He bounced around a bunch of organizations. You talked about Jahmai Jones. This a guy who bounced around a bunch of organizations, was in the minor league system, was DFA'd multiple times, and he's clearly not that guy. I mean, guys, that happens. Guys have a fun 1 year. I don't know. I think that is clearly now the aberration is that one season that he had, or a season and a half if you include the season when he was back and forth in the bullpen. Last year, he wasn't good enough, couldn't stay healthy, his arm fatigued. And this year, I mean, he's just clearly not good enough. It has nothing to do with, he's just not a good pitcher. And so you could try and put him in the bullpen, see if that helps, see if, his gimmicky tricks can work in the bullpen. Maybe he could throw a little harder if he's not trying to throw for multiple innings. You know what I mean? So maybe he could get the velocity up to like 93, 94, as opposed to what it's sitting at like 89, 91 right now. So, hopefully maybe you can do that. But I again, right now, if you go into a playoff series, I'm starting Garrett Cole, Louis Heel starting game 2 as it stands, and barring a big trade that they make, if they go trade for a starter, which I don't even fully expect, he's your number 2 starter is Louis Heel. You have Stroman, and you have Clark Schmidt when he comes back. Those are your 4 starters in a playoff series. I don't trust Nestor, and I don't trust Rodon.
Right. And I think I'm not sure what Nestor's contract situation is. I know it's not as lengthy as Rodon's and his handicapping, but just overall, and you brought up 22 or it was 21 when he kind of got put on the scene. I remember it was the old Cortez versus Tyler McGill debate. Look at 3 years later, how far we've come. Where Met fans can't stand McGill, and it seems like Yankee fans, the Bills basically out. Seems like we're nearing the end of Nestor being that guy. But you brought it up. I mean, the fact where there's obviously debates with the Mets, obviously, and I think I saw the report. They confirmed they're going to be buying. I don't know what extent, but it sounds like they're not selling. They're not dealing Alonso, and kind of the rotation. They had a bunch of question marks. All the guys like you had Quintana, Severino in the 1 year deals. Minaya is on a 2 year deal, but he's expendable. If they want to add a guy or basically move them for leverage, maybe get another arm in the bullpen. But it seems like they're holding. They're going to be potentially buying. Yankees, it's a foregone conclusion they're going to buy. I think it's a matter of how much they're going to buy and where they're going to spend it on. And I think, honestly, I don't know about you, aside from maybe the bullpen and I don't, the bullpens know Mariano Rivera is 1 through 9. You don't even have a closer that you fully trust. There is nowhere where this team couldn't use an upgrade.
Yeah, the Yankees, it needs to be all in. They talked about it from the beginning of the offseason. It's all in, it's all in, it's all in. And this is my first show I ever did on WFAN. I talked about, you say you're all in. This was right before spring training started. I was like, you keep saying you're all in. You're not, you haven't been all in. I'm sorry. Not in the offseason. I'm sorry. The Juan Soto trade is great. Since the Juan Soto trade, you got a nice bargain in Marcus Stroman. You bowed out on this. You could have gotten obviously Yamamoto, who's now on the 60-day IL. I get it, not working out great in the 1 year, but you tried to get him. You clearly wanted him with the length you went to get him, but bowed out. And then you trade for Alex Verdugo. That's all in, really. So to me, all in means looking to trade a Spencer Jones for, I don't know, Tariq Skubal or Garrett Crochet if they're available. Like, go actually all in. Go get a real bona fide number 2 starter. Go get Matt Chapman from San Francisco. And by the way, I've said this multiple times on WFAN. If they today traded for Matt Chapman, Camilo Duvall, and Tyro Estrada, those 3 players, and it would have to be a big package going the other way to San Francisco, all of a sudden, I like their chances. I really like their chances at a World Series with those 3. You put a great third baseman, right? And he can bat 4th, bat middle of the lineup. Tyro Estrada, utility infielder. When Volpe and obviously Glaber are struggling, you put him at second base, you put him at shortstop, and he could even bat leadoff for you. He's struggling this year. And then Duvall either becomes your closer or your setup guy or whatever. Play the matchups with him and Clay Holmes and figure out who's got it that night. You know what I mean? And then obviously Dominguez goes to left or center, Judge goes to left, and Stanton comes back. All of a sudden, it's like, hey, now I kind of feel good about what we're doing here. But that's huge, meaning if they're 3 pieces away, if they need 1 bullpen arm, a middle infielder, and a big bat, like, that's a lot to have to get done. Like, I don't mind Ben Rice, Anthony Volpe, and Austin Wells being in a playoff lineup, but they can't be your 1, 4, and 5 hitters. They should be your 7, 8, and 9 hitters.
Well, not only that they're top 4, top 5. I think the fact that every other night it seems like they're swapping where they specifically are.
Because they're not good enough. So we're trying to get these guys going, but at some point they just are what they are.
I think you brought up a good point, Patrick, packaging deals, and I think San Fran, they're still kind of,
they're still hanging in there.
Yeah, you look at teams that are bona fide, have no shot. I mean, the White Sox, you brought up Crochet, but if you want to package a deal, you want to talk about a big return, Louis Robert, and I doubt they go out and get him. And talk about a big splash that would be. But even a team like Oakland, I mean, Brent Rooker, Mason Miller, people are saying Miller would require a lot. You look at some of the deals, I mean, like Matt.
Well, I think they still look at him as a long-term starter, Mason Miller, and he's got so much control.
Right. That's true, but you look at what they gave up for Sean Murphy, even Matt Olson. I know that's Atlanta. People thought they were conspiring, whatever this or that, but just overall, you never know what they're gonna, ask for. Hell, even Miami, Jazz Chisholm and Tanner Scott. I mean, it seems like some of these teams that are completely out of it, you could package a couple players that are relevant and could be key pieces to a potential run.
Yeah, and I think here's the thing. I think the Yankees ultimately, they've proven time and time again. And by the way, I mean, I would take Josh Smith today over Anthony Volpe. You know what I mean? Josh Smith is a guy who was part of the Joey Gallo trade. So, and
They
he's
brought
playing in Texas.
Estrada too. Estrada was
Exactly. So my point is, there are all these guys who like they've hugged the wrong prospects, whether it's, we've talked about Greg Bird and then Miguel Andujar, Clint Frazier, Gleyber Torres, Anthony Volpe, Oswald Peraza. The list goes on and on and on. It's like a scary list of how many prospects they've hugged. So I don't trust the Yankees. And I, again, another thing I talked to Babari about, he's like, he told me he doesn't blame me. He's like, for not trusting when the Yankees say, that Spencer Jones, no, he's the real deal. I've seen Jason Dominguez play at the major league level and play well. So I trust that. But why should I believe the Yankees that Spencer Jones is this great prospect when every time they've told me they have a great prospect, he's failed? Outside of Aaron Judge,
dude.
he's a generational talent.
Yeah, dude, I was at, and I know you heard it. They were talking about Pat Boyle throwing the first pitch out at Somerset.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for it. When I tell you, we kind of had to do like research Somerset's lineup. When I tell you, and you don't need me telling you this, when I tell you this guy, every other at bat is a strikeout, I mean it. This guy, you thought Joey Gallo was bad, and this is double A we're talking about. These are guys more often than not, you're facing 30-year-olds where this is basically where they're going to peak, and that's no disrespect. That's better than I could have dreamed of pitching at. But if we're being real, that's not where you want to be. And he can't even put bat on ball down there. So, and I'm not saying he's a bad player by any means, but that being your number 2 prospect with the track record you brought up, even the Everson Pereiras of the world, and I'm blanking on I think
L'Oreal and
yeah, Esteban Florial. I mean, it's more often than not these guys are total bombs. Even Oswaldo Cabrera. I mean, he's a solid utility guy, but he's been 8-9 in this lineup that's garbage. So I think the fact that, and you even look at the Mets too. I mean, Alvarez, he's been a solid fielder. It seems like his scouting reports flipped. He was supposed to be a great hitter, solid fielder. It's a total opposite. Vientos has had his moments, but for 3 years, him and Beatty were switching in and out of quadruple A. They're sending balls 520 feet in Syracuse. They come here, they do barely nothing.
Beatty hit another 2 home runs tonight. So yeah.
So I'm saying, so it seems like in this town, and even the Mets, it's a whole story. We get into it another time. The prospects they're keeping faith in. They got four shortstops, primary shortstops, and that's 1 of 2 positions they have locked up for the next 10 years. So even Mauricio, obviously the injury and everything, but it's overall, it seems like the 2 teams in this town, they're heavily betting on prospects to pan out when their track records are far from the majority of their prospects panning out. So it's going to be interesting, man.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. So again, for the Yankees, what I expect is that they'll still trade some of the lower level prospects for a guy like a Tanner Scott or a Jazz Chisholm, improve the roster just enough, tell you, oh, don't worry, Volpe's going to turn it around, Gleyber's going to turn it around. Dominguez is going to be great and Stanton's going to be great. And then they'll flame out in the playoffs. That's what I expect. For the Mets, and here's why I have almost more faith in the Mets. The Mets have the lineup. 1 through 9 can get you in that lineup when they're whole. If you look at Marte, or if it's McNeil and Bader, and that's the bottom half of the lineup, right? Vientos, these are the back end of the lineup. What I would do if I was the Mets, just based on who's contributed for this team, I trade Pete for a starter. Go get a top of the line starter. Go to a team that needs hitting desperately, right? And I don't know who that team is. Maybe it's Seattle, who's fallen out of the race, and say, hey, you got Logan Gilbert, you got Brian Wu, and you got the other kid. I'm forgetting his name now. Who's that?
Bryce Miller.
You have these.
They got options all over. So
give me one of those pitchers. We'll give you a hitter that you desperately need. Maybe it'll get Julio Rodriguez going. Also, if Julio starts hitting, if he has Pete Alonso batting behind him in the lineup. Now, I think Pete will be better once the deadline's passed, whether he's with the Mets or another team. I think the deadline's weighing on him more than the contract. That's my personal opinion on that. I think, being moved mid-season, where as opposed to in the offseason, he'll be able to make his decision. And people talk about the contract here. I think the idea of being traded is what's weighing on him. But I think the Mets go get a reliever, go get a starter, and see what you can do. Like, I think the Mets can be really, really good. They've been one of the best teams in the league for the last month and a half now. And, maybe that's recency bias because the Yankees were the best team in the league early and the Mets stunk, and now it's flipped. But I think,
Right.
both teams are kind of headed for the same direction, which is the playoffs, probably as a wild card. Do I see either one as a world championship team? And barring significant trades at the deadline now.
No, I mean, I think honestly, speaking on both of them, the one thing to hold on to is the parity we've seen these last couple of years. I mean, the Yankees, obviously Baltimore hasn't been that great either, but I mean they're basically free falling by the day. And the Mets, they're going on this run, but teams like Philly and LA in their division alone, or Philly for Philly's sake, it just seems like there's teams that are they're so much better. But I guess you see what the parity we've seen lately. If that could be on their side, who knows, man? Who knows if we got a dream run, kind of like Arizona, Philly, despite falling short, in the World Series, but. I don't know, man. The bill's still kind of out on both of them. Hey, Rami, Zoom's kind of rushing me off because I'm not on the premium or the Zoom Pro, whatever it is. So I'm gonna have to cut this a little short. But real quick, I don't want to cut this short unannounced. Shout any of your podcasts out real quick. Anything you want to promote?
Yeah, Rami Lavi podcast, Just Fantasy Baseball podcast, Believe in Jets, and of course, I'll be all over WFAN for the next God knows how long. Hopefully, they keep me there a while.
No doubt about it, man. I'll link anyone on Twitter or if I can on Instagram. I'll link some of his podcasts down below. And Rami, appreciate it. Appreciate you giving me the time, man. It means a lot.
Thank you so much. Of course. Thanks for having me.
And thank you guys for listening. And we'll see you next time on the Apples to Apples podcast. See you guys.